Welcome to the show. I'm Zavertnik. Each week, we take a personal professional development topic, pull it apart, and distill it down to give you some practical mindset tools and applications for your own life to where you can be unstoppable. Today, we're talking about empathy. I think this is a great topic for the current times as different people are approaching this situation and dealing with different challenges in different ways. So I think it's really important to dive in on empathy and what is it? How does it differ from sympathy? What kinds of empathy are there? And how can we use that to connect and be there for others in a time where it's really challenging to, especially physically, be there with others? So I thank each and every one of you for tuning in. Let's get to it. Empathy versus sympathy. So I'm going to read this verbatim just to where we get this piece of it straight. According to Hodges and Myers, and this is from the Encyclopedia of Social Psychology, empathy is often defined as understanding another person's experience by imagining oneself in that other person's situation. So one understands the other person's experience as if it were being experienced by the self, but without the self actually experiencing it. A distinction is maintained between the self and the other person. All right, so that's empathy. Sympathy, in contrast, involves the experience of being moved by or responding in tune with another person. All right, now I wanted to read that definition just to give you a baseline of where I'm coming at this from. And so to break that down into the very simplest of terms, empathy equals feeling, sympathy equals caring. You can look at it kind of like how we assign positive and negative. Things happen in the world. As people, we choose whether that's a positive or a negative feeling. Just like empathy is the thing that's happening, and then we choose whether or not to care or use sympathy. And so I read that definition. I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page because this episode requires a bit of a disclaimer. Empathy and talking about it and describing it and understanding it is a relatively new concept. So I think the book Empathy, one of the big empathy books, came out in the 90s, but that's still relatively new in our existence. And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson summed it up pretty well on a show I was watching recently. He's like, you walk into a bookstore, there's like 3 books on gravity because we understand gravity and it's like pretty straightforward. And then there's like whole sections on understanding the mind. And so, yeah, we have a lot of books on the mind, but that's pretty indicative that we don't quite understand it. So that leads to a lot of ideas, a lot of theories, a lot of concepts, which means there's also some controversy and some disagreements. Now, I'm sure things will be more solidified as we continue to study the mind and the human existence. So just take this as a piece of the present today, doing some little research, but this is covered in psychology, sociology, philosophy, neuroscience. All of these fields are looking at and exploring empathy, and there's tons of studies. It's so easy to get lost and then get confused by contradictory science around empathy right now. Like doing some of the just most basic research for this was a lot more difficult than I expected it to be. I thought this was going to be a pretty straightforward episode. So it goes kind of into the way I like to describe myself as human, right? It means I'm connected to every single person on this planet, but at the same time, I'm a unique individual. You know, that dichotomy I think is powerful. I think it's what frames bettering oneself, understanding our humanity, and this whole ecosystem of personal and professional development. And I think it's a great reminder as we talk about empathy, because there's a couple different main types of empathy, but we also process things differently and through our own experience lens. So we have to take that into account. Now, why did I do this episode? Why do I think it's important right now? Well, me and a friend kind of got into a debate where all of this was going on, and this friend was kind of iffy. She was in transition, changing jobs, and didn't know if the new job was going to start. Like, there's just a lot of unknowns, and there was not information coming in. So the mind tends to try to, fill in the pieces and plan and prep. And then another friend who applied for a job lost her current job and is still waiting on the other job. Both people are set up successfully. They both have support systems, families to go to. And so the way I reacted to all of that was pretty nonchalant with everything going on. And looking back, I probably could have done more. But I understood conceptually what they were going through very well. Like, I have zero doubt of that situation, but I didn't feel it. And so, because we have different kinds of empathy, my friend had one and I had a different one. We weren't speaking the same language. So we're going to get into that and then I'll wrap that up. So let's talk about the two kinds of empathy. Now, these are the two main kinds. If you Google types of empathy, you'll get some that say 5, some that say 3, but it's really split up into two kinds. So emotional or affective empathy, and then cognitive empathy. So let's talk about emotional empathy. This is where you tune in to somebody else, you can mirror them emotionally, you kind of sense and feel what's going on. And so this leads to a couple different scales of empathic concern. So it leads you to express sympathy. It's more of the moves you to respond because you feel it more as an emotional feeling instead of a thought. And so it's faster for you to express sympathy and compassion for that other person because it's an innate reaction, almost motherly instinct type to think about. And then personal distress, and this is something that's studied and kind of a little bit of a gray area, but if you look at it, babies until they're around 2 years old, they mirror distress. So kind of like dogs can sense our feelings. If you're upset or you're tense and you're around a baby, they're going to mirror that and probably start whining or crying. Kind of like if you have a dog, if you're amped up and all excited, they're going to get amped up and all excited. Not mine. He sleeps all day. He hasn't moved the whole time I'm doing this and glancing over at him. Or if you're chilled out, your dog's going to be chilled out. And kids tend to do the same for the most part. I'm not trying to compare kids and dogs. It's just working for this example. But they mirror. And then once kids turn 2, they start responding in other ways. So if something happens, they'll try to help. They'll try to comfort. There's the video that Jay Shetty likes to demonstrate a lot when he talks about our innate kindness as human beings. When he goes and there's the 1 to 3 year old and somebody's crying on TV and they take a Kleenex and walk up to the TV and dab it. And I think it's just a great example for the power we have and the amount of compassion we have as human beings. And that's all, emotional centric. You feel, you mirror these emotions. If you want to talk about the spiritual side of things, you can look at energy and being more heart-centered. You're going to kind of sense things that way. Now, this is not my innate skill. Like, I don't do the emotional empathy that well. What I do is the other kind of empathy, which is cognitive empathy. And so that's more logical. Cognitive, you could probably have guessed that. So it's the capacity to understand just somebody else's perspective and maybe their mental state. And that's what I do extremely well. And so it's perspective taking. I can, in a psychological manner, think myself into that situation, look at facts, scan different ways to go for that person, and then help execute and formulate. And that helps me give people advice or coach people and help them generate ideas for themselves based on being able to understand and see kind of their lens maybe better than they can see it at the time, because they have emotions coming through as they're right there in the situation. Another cool part about cognitive empathy is the fantasy side. And this is something I learned, is the ability to identify with fictional characters. It's kind of like an alter ego effect. A few episodes ago, that was the book recommendation, was The Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman. And so you identify with that. And I never thought about that as an empathy skill, but I do that all the time. When my mind wanders, I put myself in the shoes of different leaders from books and TV shows and conceptualize how they would act, how they would do. What if I was in that role, making those decisions, being a leader in that way. And I thought that was really neat to learn and dive into when talking about empathy. And so that's something, if you do that, you might be more of a cognitive empathy skills. And the last one is tactical empathy, which if you saw on Facebook, I posted a book review a few weeks ago, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He has a whole chapter on tactical empathy. And this is where you use your perspective skills to achieve certain results. So kind of like what I was talking about with coaching is like, that's a skill I have there. But it's really used in negotiation and just communication in general. Some people can take this and say, oh, that's manipulation. Well, yes, but that's not necessarily a bad thing unless you think manipulation is bad. There's manipulation going on anytime you communicate with anybody. So it's more of a tool in that manner. And if you want to deep dive on tactical empathy, go read that book. It's an amazing book about negotiation and communication. So that's cognitive empathy. And again, that's the one that I have. Like, I'm very good at it for splitting, but people don't always see it because I just jump to the positive. Like for this situation, if you haven't lost a loved one and you have family to fall back on, you have money, you have, a decent job and income for a while, like, I just don't see any need to complain. Like, to me, I go straight to gratitude. Now, I also have to balance that with I still have my job, and I'm very fortunate for that. I'm not trying to diminish that. But I think when it comes down to it, the status doesn't matter. It's just that I'm not always the one to deliver that message. And so I just have to learn to shut up sometimes. But I think it's important to understand where people might be coming from and why in these times somebody might need something that's different than what our skills innately are able to provide. Which gets us into the last topic, or just point, is that these two types are not connected. Like I said, I have cognitive empathy, but I don't have a lot of emotional empathy. But they're skills, you can definitely learn them. They're not innate. But just because somebody has one doesn't mean they have the other. And skills in one or the other they don't equate to anything. They're two different things. They're both empathy, but they're completely different sides of the spectrum on empathy. And so it's interesting. I'm very cognitive, but there are times when though that emotional response kicks in. And I don't know if it's more an empathy thing as much as it is just sympathy or getting emotional, but I tend to react emotionally and feel emotionally in times of extreme joy or extreme pain. That's when I get activated from an emotional standpoint. And now that I'm educated about this and a lot more lately, I've been trying to feel that out just to help boost that empathy skill, get used to living in the feelings, which for many years I just ignored. Stereotypical, guy coming up in society. I just shut all of that out. So if you aren't watching Jim Krasinski's new show, Some Good News, on YouTube, I will link it here in the show notes on the blog. But this week there was some joy in there that I dare you to watch that and not tear up. It's some comedy and just some good stuff going on. And he drops an episode, I think, every Sunday night. And it is my new favorite show. If you haven't watched it, you got to check it out. It's only like 15 minutes an episode. And it's an amazing, amazing little show that he put together from his house. I think the first episode within a week had like 12 million views instantly. So it's great. So that's what we got on empathy. Empathy is the feeling, the thing, the sensing of it, and sympathy is caring or reacting to it. You have emotional empathy. That's where you feel the emotions and you can sense that energy from the person. It's a lot more heart-centric. And that really tends to move you into sympathy to respond and care for that person and mirror them. And then you have cognitive empathy, which is what my skill set tends to be, which is more logical, is more head-centric. You're thinking through things. When I feel an emotion, I instantly go up and try to process and figure it out in my head. Like, oh, I feel something. Let's figure out what that is. And I move it straight to my head. So that's it for this week's lesson, going over empathy. In the future, we're going to start changing it up. I want to add a little bit more to the show. So I think what we're going to do is create some one-pager worksheets. I really want to get tactical tips and give you guys tools that you can use throughout the day, and then give you something that you can follow along with and fill out. So kind of end the lessons with a little bit of an exercise. That way you can take it and really solidify it in your own life. Now, don't worry, I'm going to present it in a way that if you don't download the worksheets, because I know a few of you listen to this in the car on the way to work, so I will present in such a way that you can follow along and kind of conceptualize it. And if you want, you can go and print out the worksheet or fill out the worksheets online just to help solidify those tools. Because this is what we want to do, is give you the tools and the mindset tips to apply to your life, just to help you reach that next level one step at a time. Thank you all so, so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, wherever you're listening, I'd appreciate if you'd hit like, if you give me a review, if you subscribe. I have my email list back up and running. We had some issues there for a few weeks. I was transitioning. All of that is now good to go, so I threw links down to that in everywhere this is going, I believe. So go ahead and give it there, and you will get emails once a week coming up soon about new episodes and just little tips and tricks for you to live your best life. That's all for today. Have a great week, and I will see you next Tuesday.